Good morning, everyone. That was a wonderful conversation about how we think about consciousness for ourselves and for the world. What I want to talk about is some of the broader framing that is happening in the world to give us some context for what we're going through as a global species. Right? A bit about my background. I'm from India originally, raised in Canada. I spent 10 years in Europe and then the last 20 years in the US, so I'm quite confused. In general, what we're seeing is this global movement. I've now lived in 8 countries for more than a year each, and I have a pretty good sense of how different places are operating around the world. I spent a few years in Silicon Valley watching the incredible explosion of what's happening with technology, and I want to talk through and give you some framings and some tool set for how to think about the world and what's happening in the world today. The first is that we have a massive explosion of technology innovation happening globally. With the rise of the internet, with mobile, the ability to share information, we have an incredible explosion of technologies going on. Artificial intelligence, solar energy, blockchain, 3D printing, neuroscience, biotech breakthroughs. And the way I frame this is that I think we have 20 Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time. In the 15th century, the printing press emerged and fundamentally changed the world. It democratized the ability to print the Bible and took the power away from the centralized church and distributed it to everybody. Anybody could then interpret the Bible in their own way, and that gave rise to Protestantism, etc. And that really changed society. Okay? Well, if you think about solar energy, that fundamentally changes society. Blockchain fundamentally changes society. Each one of these new breakthroughs, CRISPR, or the breakthroughs that we have in biotech, fundamentally change society. And I think we have 20 hitting us at the same time. And this is a tsunami of massive innovation. Now, at one level, you can think of this as, oh my Lord, this is terrible. At another level, it's allowing anybody in the world to innovate anywhere. The third fastest supercar, electric supercar in the world, is being designed and engineered and built in Sri Lanka, that hotbed of automotive innovation. A small group of colleagues in Toronto got together and built Ethereum out of nothing, and it reached a $500 billion ecosystem. Right? And I'll suggest to you that it's never been possible for one person or a small group of people to make such a massive difference in the world. This explosion of technology is going to then wash away and transform all of the institutions by which we run the world. And that's a second major thing that's happening. Our legal systems, our healthcare systems, intellectual property, every mechanism by which we run the world is breaking. Journalism is now mostly broken. Education, think about education. All of our education systems are designed to take a young child, train them through their early 20s to be ready for the existing job market. Right? Small problem, we have no idea what a job looks like in 5 years. What are we teaching them? And so we have this major challenge and stress in all of our institutions by which we run the world. Democracies are designed to make slow changes to give the population time to catch up, but with the pace of technology, we need to make decisions very quickly, and every major democracy in the world is broken. India, where I'm from, is broken. Brazil is broken. The UK broke 3 years ago. The US is breaking in front of our eyes. Right? And how do you update that institution? My favorite example of an institution that is under stress is the institution of marriage. It turns out we invented marriage about 9,000 years ago. And when that first emerged as a social institution, 9,000 years ago, average lifespan was about 23 years. So you got married and you had kids and you died. Marriage is not supposed to last 50, 60 years. My wife calls it state-sanctioned torture. Right? We are about to double human lifespan. So do you live with the same person for 100 years? How do we think about that? How do we evolve the institution to deal with this new reality? We worry about the divorce rate, but the institution was not designed for the world that we currently live in, and this could apply to all of the institutions by which we run the world. So we have to be conscious of this and be aware of this. Now, the third thing that's happening is that our current leaders do not understand any of this. All our leadership training is about training people in 20th century, predictable, status quo, linear, stable environments. And we're entering Black Swan station where there's massive chaos hitting us from all sides, not to mention the climate reality of what's happening in the world. And the final is that we're now moving to, because we can deploy technologies at a very local level, we think we'll see the de-emphasis of nation states, a much more increased emphasis on local environments. Brexit or Trump was not about left versus right, it was really urban versus rural, right? And we're seeing this huge tension play out. Now, if you have a city or a region and you have solar energy with microgrids, water extraction from the atmosphere, vertical farming, you actually don't need centralized infrastructure, and communities can be much more self-sufficient. So we're very excited about that. So that's kind of the broad macro environment that's happening. There are two major dynamics that are taking place under this broad transformation. The first is that we've been running the world and managing the world on a concept of scarcity for 20,000 years. For example, for the last 10,000 years, if you don't have scarcity, you don't have a business. Pretty much every business in the world is selling scarcity. You get an asset or a workforce, you put a legal boundary around that, and you sell access to scarcity. Right? But what's happening with all these technologies is that these technologies are delivering us abundance. And so how do we think about business in a world where you have abundance? For example, we track doubling patterns in technologies. It turns out solar energy is on one of these doubling patterns. Solar energy is doubling in its price performance every 22 months. And it's been doing this for 40 years. So for 40 years, we've been doubling the capability of solar systems roughly every 2 years. At this pace, we will be able to deliver all of our world energy needs with solar in 8 years, by 2030. We are 4 doublings away, which means that all of our energy systems globally essentially can change. This is why Russia is doing what it's doing now, because in a few years, their oil and gas is worth very little. They have to act now. And so this massive transformation happening just in energy, which is about 10–12% of global GDP, will fundamentally change the world. Right? The Middle East has enormous problems. I'm Canadian, about 40% of exports are oil. The US will have to find other reasons to go to war. All sorts of interesting things happen as a result of this transformation. And it means we have to organize very, very differently. All of our institutions and all of our companies are all organized around scarcity. And how do we deal with an abundance problem, which is a good problem to have? We see this on the internet. Take the music industry, which used to sell, there were about 8 major music studios selling you scarcity, selling you a cassette, a CD, a DVD, and selling you scarcity as a physical product. Then we digitized music. And now you have 2 platforms, iTunes or Spotify, selling you abundance as a business model with unlimited use per month. And we think that's the transformation that will occur in industry after industry, whether it's energy or healthcare or education, etc. So one very broad change that's happening is we're moving the world from scarcity to abundance, which is very exciting in a number of different ways. In terms of how we organize for it, this means we have to fundamentally change the archetypal patterns by which we run the world. And I'm going to use the analogy of a male archetype and a female archetype to just give you some sense about this. Now, the male archetype is really good at command and control, really good for managing scarcity. We organize in a military formation. We have a top-down hierarchical structure, and we go and grab things as we need to manage the scarcity in the world. When you go to abundance, you don't want a male archetype managing the world. The internet works because it's a decentralized, peer-to-peer, collaborative participatory, cross-linking mechanism. We see the rise of Burning Man, the maker movement, the open source movement, all moving to a different type of a model for how we organize around that world. And we think business and most of our organization structures will move to that. And it's really moving from a male archetype to a female archetype. The female archetype is really good for managing abundance, because when a female archetype meets abundance, it shares it around. The male archetype relates to abundance as power, tries to hoard it. Middle East oil, Wall Street money, etc. And as we deliver the world to abundance, we need to move from male-centric, and I don't mean gender, I mean archetype, right? We need to move from male-centric structures to female-centric structures. That's a lot of the tension that we're seeing in the world today. You look at the Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street movement, the Arab Spring. This is the female archetype saying we need to nurture and manage ourselves in a different way. And right now, our tendencies for authoritarian governments are moving us the other way. Why? Because my fundamental observation about people is that human beings would much rather be comfortable than happy. And we have unbelievable potential on the other side of this threshold if we can migrate our systems from scarcity-based systems to abundance-based systems. One of our community members, Jerry Mikulski, made this point that scarcity equals abundance minus trust. Because all of our systems, all of our global governance systems are designed not to trust you. We say, do you have the driving license? Do you have the building permit? Are you the right age? We're constantly testing who you say you are, etc. What if we trusted people? Then if you can scale systems of trust, then you can actually move to systems of governance that allow us a much more conscious model for managing the world going forward. And we'll get there, but the transition from the old structure to the new structure is very, very difficult because our old structures like to stay there. We have old models to think about this, economics, capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. The best framing and metaphor I've heard about this is from Lawrence Bloom, one of our mentors and advisors who recently passed away. And he said, if you think about capitalism and fossil fuels, it was like so when you're going into space, you have a very heavy booster rocket with a lot of power that gets you into low Earth orbit. Once you get to a certain altitude, you have to get rid of that booster rocket, and then you may need a much lighter craft to take us to the next level. Right? If you don't release the booster rocket, if you wait too long to release that booster rocket, you fall back to Earth. And what's happening today is we've very successfully lifted the world out of poverty for the most part and out of a difficult situation. The world is in a better place than we've ever seen it before. We have less deaths by war, less deaths by illnesses than we've ever had. And we need now to move off that booster rocket of fossil fuels and capitalism that has been running the world and essentially move to a different model. Now, we don't fully know what that new model is, so people try and hang on to the old. But if we follow the analogy, we have to let it go so that we can get to that new model. And part of, I think, the thinking, especially that's so important in gatherings like this, is we should be conscious about this. We should be conscious and aware of what are the new models that may appear that drive the world forward in a much more powerful way, not just, say, sustainability, but regenerative systems and circular economies. And how do we think about all of that? Because it's pretty clear, you know, if a major thesis we have is that technology is a major driver of progress in the world. It might be the only major driver of progress in the world. Now we have a dozen technologies moving very, very quickly. It's magical what might come about as a result of that. Just a short example, we've seen recently a company out of Miami develop an 8-inch diameter pad that is designed to screen for breast cancer. So it has 1,000 little temperature sensors in it. If you're a woman, you put it on left and right sides for 10 minutes at home. It does a very sensitive temperature measurement, and an AI then analyzes the delta of the temperature between left and right side. This turns out to be 80% better at detecting breast cancer than a mammogram. Costs about $20, and it's now medically approved, fully tested, etc. We can now eradicate breast cancer globally just by giving this to every woman in the world. And we have hundreds of breakthrough technologies like that that can make our lives infinitely better. But getting those into the world, it requires a new way of thinking and a new system of thought around that. So really the consciousness that I think about is how do we go from a scarcity-based world to an abundance-based world, go from unhappiness to a more peaceful nature, and we now have the capabilities to do it. It's up to us to think about how we go about doing that. This afternoon we'll do a little workshop on how to think about that, but I hope this has been an interesting morning for you. Thank you very much. Thank you.